Terraria's Ranger class is slandered by people who say it's nothing more than a runaway and hold left click class. Ranger is so much more than that, and as a red-blooded American, I feel it necessary to defend a class that represents my homeland. But that's not to say that Ranger is without its flaws, and today we're going to focus on those. What does the Ranger get wrong, and what are some changes that should be made to the class to make it more fun and better design? Let's find out. Now, we're going to split this into two sections, pre-hard mode and hard mode, as the class is considerably different depending on which of these you're in. But something that can be said about both is that they are definitely not lacking in options. It'd be hard to find any moment in progression where you don't have several viable strategies using this class with various methods of obtaining the weapons you're seeking. So how are we going to fix a class, or how could a class with so many options have problems with its design? Well, some people think that Ranger needs to be nerfed and is often stronger than other classes, but I think the main problem comes from just how many weapons are verifiably useless and serve no purpose. My objective with the fixes I'm going to recommend today is to make the class have a more clear line of progression and give each of its options a real use, while hopefully maintaining and perhaps even adding to the number of viable options available to the Ranger in various stages of progression. Without further ado, we start out with what is likely the Ranger's first weapon, a simple wooden bow. Unlike the poor Summoner and Mage, Ranger has a weapon option available to them within a minute of joining the game. This is fantastic, and the order progression of bows makes a lot of sense, although things like the Copper and Tin bow are pretty pointless, and considering how cheap it is to make a bow, you very often don't need to bother with making any bow other than Platinum or Gold. Even if these lower tiers are often ignored, I think it's a good thing to keep them there for no other reason than consistency, as it'd be weird to remove any of those recipes. Where the first fix comes into view is with the Demon Bow and Tendon Bow. These obviously are better than their other ore alternatives. Now, finding the evil ore in your world is usually a bit more difficult to do, so I think that this fix isn't necessarily as important, but it's always confused me as to why the Demon Bow and Light's Bane are strangely craftable without shadow scales or tissue samples. We'll just focus on the bow since this is a Ranger video, so let's ask the obvious question. Why can you craft this weapon before the evil boss? Is it a big deal? Absolutely not. I'm not passionate about this weapon being a post-evil boss weapon, but I think that'd make a lot of sense. The only problem that arises from making this change is the obvious fact that you can obtain the Molten Fury immediately after defeating the evil boss of your world, which means the Demon Bow would only serve the purpose of fending off the underworld enemies long enough to get a Molten Bow, although not a lot of people bother getting the Molten Bow at this point in progression anyway, so maybe that doesn't matter. Giving the Demon Bow and Tendon Bow a small buff of another couple damage and adding shadow scales or tissue samples to the recipe I think would make a lot of sense. While we're on the topic of bows, we might as well finish talking about the very few that remain, the Bee's Knees, Hellwing Bow, and Blood Rain. But let's actually finish our discussion on the Molten Fury. It's a strange bow that is probably best suited for the post-evil boss point of progression, and by the time you've defeated Skeletron, there isn't much point in getting this weapon. It does have a high base damage, but guns like the handgun and Phoenix Blaster are typically a better choice. Even the Musket and Undertaker can rival it. Now, having this be a post-evil boss weapon isn't necessarily bad, only that it's weird that to get this thing when it'd be most useful requires you make a quick stop to the underworld before Skeletron. Nothing crazy or unreasonable, just more of a hassle than it's actually worth. After all, once Skeletron is defeated, the wall is likely the only boss standing in your way, and the Molten Fury is not going to be your weapon of choice. To make this weapon stand on its own 2 feet a bit better, I think we should change it so instead of inflicting the regular fire debuff, it inflicts the Hellfire debuff. This is primarily to make it a better early hard mode weapon and would actually make it the only pre-hard mode weapon to inflict this debuff, assuming you're not a melee user with the Magma Stone. But considering its typical lack of use and general uselessness for where it would generally be obtained, I think this change would make it a more enticing option. The Blood Rain Bow is not something that I see needing much of a change. It gives Ranger a more interesting weapon with more unique use cases. In many ways, it's like Ranger's version of the Star Fury, only more annoying and RNG reliant to obtain, not being useful for cave exploration, and generally having a harder time functioning underground. It's hard to say this bow is worthwhile, and the weapons you'd need to defeat a wandering eyefish or zombie merman would likely outclass the Blood Rain Bow. It's not a totally useless weapon, but considering how rare Blood Moons can be and the somewhat great lengths you must go to obtain the thing, a small buff could be warranted. It's just a difficult dance as its unique ability could make it quickly overpowered if not reined in, but personally, I think all of the Blood Moon weapons deserve to be in the top class of their tier due to the extra steps and time commitment that is often required to obtain them. This leaves us with our final two bows, the Bee's Knees and Hellwing Bow, both of which I think are fairly well designed and don't need any real changes. Both of them have special arrow types that you only benefit from if you use the standard wooden arrow. This is good because it gives these bows a unique effect while also requiring you use the weakest arrow kind in order to get the benefit of those effects. Both of them could very well be used with any other kind of arrow type and can be quite effective using them, but I find most people end up using the regular wooden arrows with them as their special effects are very useful. Take the Bee's Knees. The arrow splitting into friendly bees to attack your foes gives the ranger the ability to hit enemies outside of their sight line. It's not a lot of bees and it would take a while, but outside of meteor shots and the hard to obtain blood rain, this is the only way in pre-hard mode that you can do this. Its damage is not absurd, and you could even argue that at times it can be pretty weak if you're not utilizing the bee pack and sharktooth necklace, with it being viable without these things but finding an even stronger standing with them. Plus, it's obtained from Queen Bee, a boss that could be fought in various stages of the game, but you'll find it difficult to defeat the boss using weaker weapons, so it doesn't skip over anything while also not making anything after irrelevant, and has special use cases. To me, it's perhaps the best balanced ranger weapon in the game. The Hellwing Bow follows a similar roadmap, with it being obtained usually later in the game. The only issue, as far as I can see it, is that the bow's wide attack radius only makes it useful against the Wall of Fresh, while you'd usually be better off using anything else against the day-to-day enemies. But considering how easy it is to obtain, having only one use for it makes a lot of sense. That covers all the bows in pre-hard mode, so let's move over to the guns, and the first and most obvious point to raise is the absolute absurdity that is the flintlock pistol. To obtain this weapon, you must get the arms dealer to spawn, and to get him to spawn, you need a gun. The guns you will likely find first are the musket, undertaker, or boomstick. Maybe the pneumatic horn if you're crazy like me when I tried doing the Ranger the right way run. And if you're a new player, I suppose there's an off chance you'll end up defeating Skeletron first just because of how that boss is and maybe getting the handgun while you're in the dungeon. Regardless, it makes absolutely zero sense that the weakest gun in the game requires you obtain a gun stronger than itself before you can purchase it. This weapon doesn't need a fix, it just needs to be removed for how useless it is. But if we don't want to do that, here's what I propose. The musket and undertaker are fairly strong weapons that can make on-tier bows irrelevant to an extent and can be obtained by the savvy Terrarian with relative ease. I say we make it so Shadow Orbs and Crimson Hearts just drop the flintlock pistol. This gives the player a gun still, and one that is actually well suited for the point of progression you'd be able to obtain it in. We then make it so the musket and undertaker are sold by the arms dealer. Either both are sold and it's player's choice as to which to use, or maybe even both, or we make it so it is still locked behind Corruption and Crimson. This would add a small hurdle for the more experienced Terrarians and doesn't change much, but it does accomplish our goal of giving the flintlock pistol a purpose in use. As for the musket and undertaker, I do think they could use a small debuff, but only a very small one. Considering how early you can get your hands on these things, I think they can make bows too irrelevant too quickly. It's one of the reasons you would never mind for a Molten Fury. The musket is easier to get in every possible way while having the same base damage, and considering the musket and undertaker can very easily carry you through most of pre-hard mode and are obtainable pre-boss, I say we lower the musket's base damage to something like 25 and the undertaker's to 17, so they aren't nearly as obvious a choice. Another gun that can be obtained pre-boss is the boomstick. This is another weapon that can bring you through just about all of pre-hard mode, but with this one, I'm a little more hesitant to make any changes. The jungle is more dangerous to navigate, and it'll take much longer to obtain this thing unless you get lucky. I also can't think of a good way to debuff it or make it harder to obtain other than maybe giving it the Thunder Zapper treatment, and making it so the gun only appears in chests deeper in the jungle. This would mean savvy Terrarians will not have to rely on RNG nearly as much, as there would be a dedicated depth that this thing would be found in, but also means that at the very least, they will need to explore through some more of the jungle rather than luckily finding one in a chest down the first cave they were in. Outside of that, I think we'll leave it alone. Being a shotgun, it encourages slightly different play from other weapons. If you want to maximize its effectiveness, you'll need to be closer to your target to allow more bullets to hit, and attacking from a distance will likely result in only a couple of bullets landing, and with a lower base damage, these shots would have been better spent on something like a musket. A weapon that does need some help is the pneumatic horn. Now, this is less of a problem that comes from the weapon and more of a problem that comes from Deerclops' design. fine. Since she doesn't despawn, you can much more easily defeat her early in the game with enough determination. For this reason, it makes sense that her weapons would not be super strong, otherwise you would always farm her at the start and use her weapons the rest of the game. But because she was also made pretty strong with the game's most unfair and annoying attack, you might decide against bashing your head into this furry brick wall, in which case you will most definitely have weapons that outclass her drops. This applies heavily to the Pneumatic Horn. In my run talking about if we've been playing Ranger wrong, I found that the Pneumatic Horn was a pretty good weapon if used against King Slime and the Eye of Cthulhu. If you were able to use something like Meteor Shot with this weapon, I can see it perhaps being actually useful, or maybe if Meteor Shot combined with the random projectile thingies that it does. But because it can only be effective or only really works against a single target, you can maybe use it against Skeletron, but there are better options. And why on earth would you fight Deerclops before King Slime or the Eye of Cthulhu? All that said, I can't make a change to this weapon as buffing it would very easily make it too powerful when Deerclops is the boss that drops it. Maybe add another 2 to 3 damage to the thing because Deerclops is generally a boss you'd go out of your way to defeat, but Deerclops is the one that needs changing here. The Mini Shark is a Ranger favorite, and we're going to leave it alone. It's also pre-boss, and with its insanely fast speed, you'd think it's overpowered, but I think it fits in nicely. For one, it costs a lot of money to obtain, so it'll still require some work to get, and it's going to consume a lot more ammunition, making it more expensive to use. Maybe it could be moved to be a post-eye purchase from the arms dealer, but we're going to leave it as is. Unlike the quad barrel shotgun, being sold only after Skeletron is defeated is a strange choice if you ask me. It's even less accurate than the boomstick, meaning to fully abuse this thing, you'd need to be at near point-blank range. Its super slow fire rate holds it back as well. It's good at two things, firing such a wide spread that it's unlikely anything on the other side of it will avoid being hit, and dealing high damage when held at your opponent's face. Utilizing Meteor Shot, this is a solid wall of fresh weapon, giving the weapon piercing on top of its high knockback, another benefit of this shotgun, and its wide bullet spread let it dish out solid damage while keeping the hungry away better than just about any other weapon. Similar to the Hellwing bow, this weapon has that one primary use, for slaying the wall. It's a tiny bit more annoying to obtain, but only in the sense that I'm sure it hasn't occurred to a lot of people to create an ectomist around their NPCs to see if their shops change. I'd like to see what happens if this weapon were moved to be post-Evo boss. Let the player use it against bosses like Queen Bee, Skeletron, or maybe even Deerclops. I could see it becoming a useful or go-to weapon for some people against those bosses while not making other options irrelevant. The last two guns, the handgun and revolver, will just leave exactly as they are. The handgun to Phoenix Blaster upgrade is a little silly, but fine, and the revolver is a traveling merchant drop. The RNG is too crazy and revolver so unremarkable so as to not be a concern. That doesn't bring us to the end of pre-hard mode Ranger, however. There are still the consumable, throwable weapons and those classified as other. We'll try to go through these quickly because most of them are less Ranger weapons or more goofy weapons that happen to be given the Ranger classification, like paper airplanes. Nobody was ever meant to actually use these things, although they are perhaps more rare than they realistically need to be. On a windy day, let's make these things a common drop from slimes. Why not? Let's have some fun with paper airplanes, and if you get a windy day on the first day, maybe you'll actually find yourself unironically using them. Shurikens are the throwable that currently fill the role of being a cheap disposable weapon you use while working your way toward a better weapon. They are wonderful and common. The throwing knife, however, not the same story. They are a bit more rare and considering their damage output, fairly so, but what I'd like to see is for their upgrade, the poisoned throwing knife, to be empowered. This is one of the only Ranger weapons that will inflict poison, and putting it on a consumable weapon balances it out. I say make poison knives deal a base 18 damage to try and draw more people into actually using them. Bone throwing knives and bone javelins are pretty unique weapons that can be crafted while searching for the Ranger's first armor set. They aren't the best weapons in the world, but very much hold their own with unique uses, and since you can get them while searching for something even more valuable than they are, they fit in very nicely as they are. The Molotov cocktail, on the other hand, might be a little strong for its position. Not crazy by any means though, so we'll leave it alone, unlike its grenade counterpart. These things deal lots of splash damage and can be purchased very early in the game. Their only downside is the self-inflicted damage they can deal if you're close to your target. That helps balance them out a bit, but I think they could use a minor debuff. Say we shave off 10 damage. Beanades, rotten eggs, star anise, and frost daggerfish I think are all fine as they are. Spiky balls are also fine as is, and I think they are probably underutilized by people due to missing their potential. Finally, we come to the other weapons, and half of these are useless, while the other half are very specifically useful. The blowpipe is arguably worse than a regular wood bow, and infinitely harder to find and utilize, and the harpoon is outclassed by everything else you can get at that point in progression. At best, it can stand on its own when you get in just the right shot on invasions, like, you know, the goblin invasion that you get it from, or maybe you can use it well against bosses if you play super close to reduce the retraction time of the harpoon. The blowgun is outclassed by anything you could get after Queen Bee, so what are we going to do? The blowpipe, for one, needs a major upgrade, maybe even double its damage. Perhaps that'd be too much, but it's not a reliable weapon to find anyways. The harpoon, meanwhile, should have its projectile speed doubled. I happen to have that in a challenge run where I did all kinds of crazy things to mess with the balance and threats of enemies, and doubling the speed of the harpoon's projectiles made the harpoon a much more useful weapon. The snowball cannon is solid, maybe buff it by a damage or two. The paintball gun and ale tosser aren't real weapons in my view, so we'll leave them as they are. The sand gun is actually surprisingly viable. It's just that most people don't want to deal with cleaning up the sand, and the star cannon is just a good weapon with very specific uses. There's also the blowgun, which is a weapon that really needs a lot of help. I'm going to say we actually just double that one's damage. It needs it, because otherwise, why would you ever use this thing? And with that, we at long last finished the pre-hard mode Ranger. Except for two things, armor and accessories. All right, let's talk about them. First, there's fossil armor. It's the first armor the Ranger can get, and then necro armor is post-Skeletron. It creates a very large gap between armor upgrades for the Ranger. It arguably has the fewest armor sets of any class. Melee technically does, but I consider all the armors melee armor. What if we added a Ranger armor crafted from something Deerclops drops though? Add a new drop to the boss, combine it with Demonite, let's say, and make a new Ranger armor set between fossil and necro armor. This is a very minor thing, but it'd flesh out the Ranger some more while giving Deerclops a little more purpose. But overall, Ranger's armors are fine and can be left as is. Accessories are another story. Ranger is the only class that has 0 pre-hard mode accessories specific to the class. Now, most classes are pretty sparse in their accessories in pre-hard mode, so we don't need to make much of a change here. Not to mention, it could be hard to add anything that wouldn't quickly make the Ranger overpowered in hard mode. Something that adds more speed, damage, or projectiles could stack all too well with hard mode weapons. A simple accessory that we could add, let's say, is maybe an extra clip accessory, and this would reduce ammo usage by 20%. The Ranger is so ammo heavy, and allowing them to conserve more of it doesn't harm anything, and would be a nice respite, as the Curious Ranger will be spending boatloads of money on various ammo types. Maybe make it so you can combine it with a magic quiver to make an accessory that does 10% increased bullet damage and 20% chance not to consume bullets. Magic quiver doesn't need more crafting recipes, but at least this way it wouldn't create another crazy stack for bows and give guns a little love. Let's also make that accessory a 2.5% drop from man-eaters to play into the Uzi being a 1% drop from angry trappers. We'll also want to add one more accessory for the Ranger class because 2 seems like a solid number. Let's add the heavy boots. When you double tap the up key, we'll say, this accessory plants you in place. While planted, you are immune to knockback and deal 5% more damage. This runs counter to the typical Ranger playstyle of running while also being something that could find strong synergy with Shroomite armor. And don't you worry about Shroomite armor, we'll be getting to that in hard mode, which we're finally going to start talking about. But before we continue, if you haven't already, be sure to hit that big juicy red subscribe button down below. We gotta try and become the biggest Terraria YouTuber with the funny red hat. So if you've been enjoying the video, be sure to subscribe. We'll start with the bows of the hard mode Ranger. There is quite the wide selection of bows at the very start. There's the Pearlwood bow, of course, and we will not be changing it in any way. It's perfect as is. What's not perfect is the Ice Bow, Shadow Flame bow, and Marrow. This triple whammy of unique bow drops is really cool, with each of them dropping from different enemies and doing totally different things. I love how they are spread about and there isn't necessarily one that is easier to obtain than the other. The Marrow is a rare drop from a pretty common enemy. The Shadow Flame bow is a pretty likely drop from an invasion that isn't super hard to summon but will require some farming. Those two bows are solid and on a pretty similar tier, though the Shadow Flame bow's piercing will almost always make it a better option. The odd boy of the bunch is the Ice Bow. First of all, it drops from Ice Mimics, an uncommon enemy. Secondly, it doesn't pierce, so it having the lowest base damage doesn't make any sense. Thirdly, it doesn't inflict a debuff like the Shadow Flame bow. Not to mention that if it did inflict Frostburn, it'd still be a worse debuff than the Shadow Flame bow. The only thing it has going for it is that it's faster, but you'd only know that by looking at the wiki, and generally if the weapon speed is in-game is the same, then it's close enough to make very little difference. The Ice Bow just makes no sense. Here's what we'll do. First, change the marrow to shoot bone arrows so it gets 1 pierce. The Shadow Flame bow pierces twice, making it better still against invasions, and its debuff making it still worthwhile against single targets, but the extra pierce makes the marrow even more enticing. The Ice Bow, on the other hand, needs to be made even faster to be extremely fast and inflict the Frostburn debuff. That would make these bows much more even, and considering that each of them is nearly an equivalent amount of farming depending on your RNG, I think this works. Does this mean we need to change up any of the ore repeaters? I don't think so. Those bows benefit from utilizing special arrows for increased damage and specific effects like Ichor, while also being much simpler to obtain. So I think those can all stay as they are. We'll ignore the Pulse bow, partially because I don't remember the last time I ever got this thing on tier, and it's just a fine weapon, whatever, it'll just stay in the corner over there. The Phantom Phoenix is a very cool bow, but also not worthwhile in most cases. The Old One's army is a strange beast, as I don't think most people farm its weapons, especially the tier 2 Old One's army, because it's in such a small part of progression. I think the Phantom Phoenix could be buffed to deal a whopping 10 more damage just to make it more useful against bosses like Glenterra, and if you want to defeat Prime and the Twins to try and use the Phoenix's piercing to shred the Destroyer, then all the power to you. I'm not sure if it'll work, but there's also so many other busted options, what's one more? On a similar note, the Daedalus Stormbow, ever since the debuff to Holy Arrows, is pretty fine, no changes there. The Hollow Repeater and Chlorophyte Shotbow are both just fine as they are, and we'll save the final bows for when we're later in hard mode, because that's where the weapon variety is so broad that we'll need to look at everything together. So let's take a look at the guns of early hard mode. First, there's the Clockwork Assault Rifle, which can actually be a suitable weapon against even the mechs, perhaps making it too strong, but considering how annoying it can be to farm for, I think we will just leave that one as is. Same with the Shotgun and Onyx Blaster, both are great options, and although the Onyx Blaster is really good, I think it's actually overhyped. The Gatligator is nothing special, but it's another Charlie Merchant purchase, good luck getting it when it's useful. Same with the Uzi, with a 1% drop chance from a rarer enemy in the jungle. I don't even remember the last time I ever saw this weapon. Despite all of the times players usually have to spend in the jungle, I have not seen an Uzi in at least my last 10 runs, including the one where I specifically farmed for it. It's arguably better than the Mega Shark, definitely better when using regular musket balls, but with some special ammo, the Mega Shark could overtake it. This leads us to the question, what's the point of the Uzi? You farm for it in a biome where it's the only thing that is useful for the Ranger at this point of progression, unless you count this as jungle key farming as well. After some experimenting, I found Angry Trappers were more common on the surface, so that's a helpful tip if you want to obtain this thing pre-mech, but considering how the Mega Shark is crafted using the Destroyer's Souls of Might, and the Mega Shark is not a good weapon against the Destroyer, you're not really missing out on anything by simply ignoring the Uzi. It's kind of a redundant weapon. Maybe buffing its damage a little more would make sense just because of how much of a pain it is to farm for. I'm not a fan of making it stronger than the Mega Shark, a weapon that's technically later in progression, but I think its rarity and that its counterpart is obtained using other weapons makes it work. Before getting to the mechs, the Toxicarp Dart Rifle or Pistol, and Coin Gun if you want to include it in all the other options you could obtain. The Toxicarp, although handy for not consuming ammo, is often not very practical to use. Giving the bubbles a little more velocity for slightly more range I think would make them more likely to, be useful. And the Dart Rifle and Pistol are some of the most underrated weapons in the game if you ask me. They have crazy versatility when using Cursed and Crystal Darts, and the Ichor ones are fine too. You'll just have to get used to switching your ammo around, but we'll talk about fixing that later. Now let's move on to the post-mech stage where Rangers' 3 subclasses begin to converge a lot more. Once Plantera is slain, something you should do with a flamethrower because it's awesome, you can get the Venus Magnum and are guaranteed the Grenade Launcher. The Grenade Launcher is a fine weapon, but not strong enough in most cases to take the risk of hurting yourself if the target is too close. I think it and most of the early launchers are in need of some help. The Venus Magnum is an underrated gun from what I've observed. It's very good for single targets, and with the right ammo, it can serve as crowd control as well. But the weapons that are very clearly meant to be your crowd control are the Grenade Launcher, Proximity Mine Launcher, and Rocket Launcher. It's hard hard to say which of these three is better than the other. The rocket launcher deals the least damage, but has the greatest range. The grenade launcher does a little more damage with a little less range, while the proximity mine launcher has the most damage with pretty short range, which can be dangerous when using rockets, but it's a very unique weapon in that you can plant mines, and if those mines have the time to get planted, then they will deal significantly more damage, triple to be exact. Planting mines and controlling your enemy's movements makes the thing fantastic. The problem with the launchers is they aren't so much better than the other weapons to be worthwhile unless you craft these really expensive rockets at 1 shroomite per 100 rockets. Not awful, but much more expensive than simply using the tactical shotgun with nanite bullets or the Venus Magnum. Increasing their damage slightly would make them a bit more tempting, but it's not that bad as is. The sniper rifle is actually underutilized, at least by me. Surprisingly, it works a lot better than I thought it would and is well suited for invasions with shroomite armor. The two are a good pair. These are all fine, but the problems arise from the moon event drops. What is the purpose of these things and why do they exist? More specifically, the pumpkin moon drops. What is hilarious, or perhaps sad, is that the jack-o'-lantern launcher, the wiki itself, says is particularly useful for the hard mode or post-Plantera dungeon. Excuse me, who is the Yahoo who wrote this? For one, in order to summon the pumpkin moon in the first place, you'll have already had to farm the hard mode dungeon. 2, the pumpkin moon, even with dungeon weapons, is still quite difficult to farm. In my latest run, it took me 3 attempts to defeat my first pumpkin, and that's thanks in part to having defeated enough enemies to get banners. 3rd, who is returning to the dungeon after farming the pumpkin moon unless you're going to get more ectoplasm? Is this why this weapon is so pitiful? It's definitely stronger than the grenade launcher with more base damage, critical strike, and a projectile that deals more damage. Plus, it bounces off of walls. This is definitely a solid weapon to use for the hard mode dungeon, but the order of events are flipped around. It's an option for Golem, I guess, but there's no reason to go out of your way for it. Considering how it has so few uses, let's make it shoot 2 pumpkins at once. It'd probably shred Golem, but what the heck, let it. You went through the struggle and time commitment of farming the pumpkin moon. That'd also make it great, maybe, for the frost moon, which is what the wiki says the candy corn rifle is good for. That's at least a use, but I have to point out that the wiki says it's a good weapon for destroyer? But this is just silly. The Venus Magnum with high velocity bullets is a better option in every way. Higher base damage, weapon damage, faster bullets. The only disadvantage is the bullets don't bounce. Give this weapon infinite pierce. Just do it. Then it'd truly be a weapon to contend with. Though I must admit, even as it is, I actually did find myself using it quite a bit against the pumpkin moon and even as just a casual weapon as I roamed around. It's not that bad, but there are just better options, and considering how hard it is to farm for, I think it could use the buff. Now, the chain gun is a fine weapon with chlorophyte bullets. We can leave it as is. The snowman cannon is a special weapon, as it's the only rocket with homing, making it great for cultists if you don't want to worry about chlorophyte bullets, so the frost moon is good. Well, except for the elf melter. It's just an upgrade to the flamethrower, but at this point it serves little purpose. It doesn't have the utility to make it helpful against cultists, empress, or duke, and there are better options for the pillars. It's fine against golem, but I'd like to see it buffed another 5 damage. Now, I'm a little on the fence with that buff just because when I experimented a little bit more with it, I actually found the elf melter to be a little stronger than I had anticipated, and I always thought it did the frostburn debuff, but it doesn't. Instead, it deals the frostbite debuff, which according to the wiki, does 25 damage per second. If nothing else, it's a really good alternate, and is at least on tier with a lot of the other weapons that would be used against golem. So maybe this buff is a bit, too much, but I'd still like to see what happens when it's applied. The stinger and nail gun I think are fine as they are, and are honestly underutilized weapons. Both can deal nasty damage when used right. The Xenopopper could use a small buff, and I think this would mostly just require a rework of the weapon. The weird bubbles and then bullets thing is just odd, and I don't see any particular benefit in it. Let's change the weapon so it shoots these bubbles and bullets at the same time, doubling the projectiles and giving the player a reason to play close to the enemy. The Electrosphere Launcher, meanwhile, is a half-decent weapon for shredding the pillars, but there are plenty of other weapons that do that just as well or better, and there aren't many single targets to take on with this thing. Buffing its damage, having it shoot 2 projectiles, or even having the projectile have infinite range rather than landing where you click could all potentially be beneficial changes. That leaves us with only the Tsunami, Aerial Bane, both of which are good as is, and the Eventide, which just suffers from being a drop from Empress. All their drops are good, but become irrelevant pretty quickly due to their position and progression. We'll leave it alone. So that covers all the weapons, which leaves us only two things: better ammo management and Shroomite armor. For better ammo management, I propose we add a hard mode recipe to create something that's similar to the infinite bullet pouch. Maybe we add crystal shards and souls of night and light into the recipe, but whatever we do, we're going to make one that holds arrows, one that holds bullets, and one that holds special ammo. Each of these would hold up to 3 of any particular ammo type. We can even limit it so these pouches still only have 9,999 ammo in them, but you can mix and match. While using a ranger weapon of a certain ammo type, simply left-clicking will alternate the ammo in the corresponding pouch. I'm not sure how simple this would be to actually implement, but the idea of it I think would be a massive help for the ranger class. Right now, I think a lot of people miss out on the cool things you can do with different ammo types because nobody wants to have 10 different ammos filling up their inventory while also constantly dragging the mouse over and reorganizing them mid-battle. That's a nice fix, but Shroomite armor. Oh, you won't like what I have to say about Shroomite armor. Shroomite armor is the stupidest armor in the game, and that is definitely an exaggeration, but one I'm standing by. Putrid Scent, Invisibility Potions, Shroomites, Camouflage, the decreased aggro these are supposed to give you amount to exactly nothing during any moments when they would actually be useful, such as boss fights. It's not like you can go invisible and suddenly the boss has a chance of attacking some random space where you are not. No, they know where you are at all times, and for invasions, even if we pretend like they don't see you, there are still so many of them that they'll bump into you in no time. So what's the point of this armor? Its set bonus dares you to do everything counter to Ranger's design up to this point. Stand still and I guess pray the big eldritch deity somehow misses you. Now, I actually think this is an idea that deserves to shine. I like how the set bonus asks you to do something counter to the class's typical playstyle, and something that is inherently more risky. The reward is a considerable boost in damage and critical strike, but actually gaining that reward when you'd actually want it is next to impossible. And the main reason for that is that the armor bonus only applies after standing still and not attacking until the bonus has been applied. So not only do you need to find a way to position yourself in a place to not take a hit for a few seconds, but you also can't attack during that time you're waiting. And there isn't a boss remaining at this point in the game who hasn't made you regret crafting this armor before you're able to get that first shot off. Oh, and did I mention that you lose the bonus once you get hit as well? Now, the armor's other benefits are fine. 7 more defense, 5% more critical strike, 7% movement speed, and 7% more damage is a pretty decent upgrade. But we have to remember, Glorified Armor puts an auto turret over your head and buffs all your ranged weapons instead of just one subclass. Oh yeah, I didn't mention, Shroomite forces you to choose just one subclass. You'll actually deal 8% less damage for any weapon that is not the subclass you choose. If you only use one weapon type, then you're actually better off with Shroomite armor in all likelihood, but why are you making me choose one subclass at the point in progression with the greatest variety and most fun weapons? This armor is a travesty, or at least it is in single player. In multiplayer, I could see how this would be phenomenal, but not all of us have the good fortune of friends with good taste, and there's no reason we can't make this armor useful in both scenarios. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to remove the helmet variants and change the invisibility debuff so that it still gets activated while you're attacking. It's that simple. If the player doesn't need to wait around for 2 seconds to get the set bonus to activate, then it'll actually be possible to use the set bonus in the heat of battle and thus encourage them to play more risky by dodging, standing still, and then dashing away. Now, perhaps it needs to be a little harder to craft for this reason, so we're going to add ectoplasm to the recipe as well. I also suggested the heavy boots specifically to synergize with this armor, offering lots of extra damage, an alternative to a shield, and promoting even more risky gameplay. We're going to keep the fact that staying still with mounts also does not activate this bonus, as that'd probably get OP, but I think these little changes will more than make this armor actually useful. And with that, we have finally covered everything. Ranger is mostly fine, and it has so many choices for the player to make and so many viable options as things stand right now. I'd say it's perhaps the best designed class in the game, but there are still many weapons that deserve a chance to shine and are outright unusable in their current state. And I think these changes I've suggested could make them not only more useful, but the class as a whole a lot more interesting. But let me know what you think. Are my suggestions good, or are they absolute garbage that would ruin Terraria's balance balance beyond repair? Let me know. I'm sure there are things I overlooked, and maybe I missed just how strong some of these weapons actually are. And if you enjoyed this video, you should see what changes I recommend for fixing the mage class by watching the video right here.